This is a production of Cornell University.
Thanks for joining us, John. I'm going to just take a couple of minutes and make my way through an update to set the stage for our conversation. The fastest 30 minutes in turf, we like to call it, and it's an hour and a half if you look at all three webinars during the week. So always, I'm a good visitor of Twitter. Love to see a tweet of somebody helping out on the golf course, and I got to tell you, there has to be some lag effect that some of these things that look cute now are going to have. People are going to bump into things. It's like, yeah, it's actually pretty cool working on a golf course. Wow, I think I can get up and do this. And the next thing you know, you see wonderful videos like just came out the other day. I think it was a bunch of turf professionals talking about really enjoying the work and students being involved. So a lot of good, and of course, families being together on the course is always a positive thing. Carl was out. Carl, our resident professional golfer who decided to take up gainful employment and made the mistake of working with me all these years, was out playing golf at one of our wonderful state park golf courses. Carl, make sure you put a link to all those wonderful state park golf courses and the steps we're taking to address the needs of cart use, right? And here is the golf pro or member of the Soaring Eagle staff. Big shout out to those guys. Course was in great shape, Carl tells me. And sanitizing the golf carts, right? There's probably many ways to skin this cat. And so there's a video on Facebook that Carl can direct you to. And listen, nobody knows how to do this. Nobody went to school for how to sanitize a stupid golf cart, right? I mean, it's like a lot of things in this business. It's common sense oriented. So, there's lots of ways to do it, but my advice is to get a procedure in place. There's places to start, right? The New Jersey superintendents, I was poking around again in preparation for this the other day. I'm like, yeah, how much more do we have? And I'm like, yeah, the Jersey guys, what they got from Easy Go is still one of the best things we have just about how to deal with this. Now, what's interesting, and you look into this a little bit and all of a sudden we're spraying sanitizer everywhere. I have a friend over at Pesticide Management Education here at Cornell, the PMET program that administers all the pesticide training for all the categories run by the DEC. This is a private operation here, not a private operation. It's a sort of an enterprise operation at Cornell. It's many years lived on DEC funding and now has to sort of determine how it's going to be in the future. But recently, with all the concern about, we got to spray these things. I mean, what's he spraying? What is that? We're spraying something to kill something. And so the PMEP is trying to give guidance on this and directing you to this wonderful website that the DEC put up and updates. Apparently it was updated on the 8th, most recently. I took this off just the other day, of products you can use, products that are labeled, right? If you're going to start doing this and we're going to start exposing people to these things, right? We better make sure we're at least using products. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to ask, do you have to be certified to do this? And Carl, I don't know the answer to that question, but it made me think about it. It's certainly something we should explore. Now we're going to be spraying these things down with disinfectant. I mean, there's no reason to think it's a problem. I mean, I don't know you have to be certified to use disinfectants in your bathroom. So I don't know why you would have to be, but certainly worthy of exploration. Just a note of returning to normalcy, right? I look at my email this morning and I get this from the MAGs, the Mid-Atlantic superintendents down there in the Chesapeake Bay, and they're having this challenge between the Eastern Shore and the Mid-Atlantic every year. And it's a golf tournament. And so here is, I'm looking, all right, what are these guys going to do? All right, here's how they're going to do it. I thought the second one was very interesting. You can have foursomes, but you can only have 2 carts, and only one person can use a cart. The other person's got to walk the whole way, but both bags have to be in the cart. All right. 15 ways to do this to try to keep, hey, can one of you walk? Can one of us walk? Right. And so, and that sort of saves us a little bit on the traffic thing. I thought that was pretty cool from those guys. Anyway, for those of you everywhere else, but in upstate New York, this is what I woke up to today. Walked out the door, looked out, the sun shining on the barn across the street, and there it is, snow on the ground. So I don't need to tell you how far behind we remain from what looked like was going to be, guys putting pre-emergence and summer patch materials down at the end of March, early April, to now essentially the conversation with John today will be about that particular fact and addressing those root-borne pathogens. But you can see from our weather data, from our forecast website, that we're just not changing very much. And the forecast looks a little better. We're in the double-digit accumulation now of base 50 growing degree days. This is not a place we've been really since early April. It's more than 6 weeks since we've been able to accumulate more than just single digits in much of New York State, and probably, like John, along the coast and in stores, maybe a little bit more because of the impact of the water bodies. Now, the conversation for today is really about root pathogens. I know, John was one of the many scholars that came out of the Rutgers Anthracnose Initiative for many years. John did some wonderful work there, but of course, the most important thing is he walked away with his lovely wife, Michelle DaCosta, another wonderful professor at the University of Massachusetts. But while they were there, John was studying annual bluegrass in anthracnose, and Turgeon presents this sort of growth model for the way annual bluegrass grows. And Michelle is studying bentgrass. I think it was water stress, as I recall, fairway water management back in the day, looking at bentgrasses, different types of bentgrasses. But one of the things we know about bentgrasses and bentgrass root growth, right, is that you're going to get a lot more root growth early on than you're going to get top growth on a lot of these bentgrasses if we're talking roots for today. All right, so since we're talking roots, let's talk about soil temperature. Here is where we were about 6 weeks ago. You could see it was looking okay. We're about to have our triggers hit for our summer patch and take-all patch sprays. And then May 4th, you could see last week we were really sniffing at it again. And you wake up today and the 2-inch soil temperature, which is very reflective of the air temperature, simply will not budge beyond the mid-50s, even in the urban areas. Okay, so fairy ring and summer patch, take-all patch are the topics for today. Mostly summer patch and some take-all. No fairy ring today, John. No worries. But I take and use this publication. If you don't have this on your desk, it's really the most practical guide available. And as soon as the compendium maybe gets done at some point, is the compendium done, John?
I think if it's not done, they're just, I think they're kind of wrapping it up. So,
okay. Right.
I think we're pretty close. It'll be exciting.
That's the nice companion to this particular publication. And so I found some of John's work on the internet where he was giving a presentation about this particular topic and his research. And there have always been some particular things he's noticed that have fascinated me. In this case, you can see the very typical summer patch you might see on a intermediate rough next to a fairway or a collar next to a putting green. John took this wonderful picture. This has got to be an all-time, this is a Hall of Fame picture, in my opinion, for a root disease where he's taken the sample. You can see where he's taken the sample from right at the edge of the patch.
Hey, I don't want to interrupt you here, Frank, but back up a second, because there's something real interesting. This photo, I think what's great about this photo, back up.
Oh, this one. Yeah. Go.
No. Back up to the mowing height.
Oh, there you go.
So what I think is really interesting in this photograph, so you've got a creeping bentgrass putting green there, obviously, and then you've got your first step cut, Kentucky bluegrass. That's the exact same cultivar of Kentucky bluegrass at 3 inches and 1.5 inches. And what this photograph really illustrates is the effect of mowing height on summer patch. Okay, so I mean, you've got summer patch in that 1.5 inch cut. I guarantee you have. I mean, obviously it shows the species difference, but in the 3 and the 1.5 inch mowing heights, the pathogen's there. You don't see the diseases prevalently in that 3.5 and that 3 inch mowing height because the height of cut is greater. Presumably, we have more roots. Okay, we have more root mass. We have more numbers of roots, and I think it just illustrates very much summer patch is a war of attrition.
Hmm.
The more roots you have, the more roots you can tolerate losing and still maintain acceptable turf.
And so here is the image of the healthy roots going through the aerification hole, and along the patch here, along the patch where you took the sample, you can see that the roots have declined. So obviously, John, if the roots were more prolific outside of the aerification holes, that would help this side of the sample, but it also demonstrates at least the potential value, right, that aerification and relieving compaction can have. So listen, this is what the guys are saying in that manual. I'm assuming somewhat dependent on your work, because they talk about it here. And there's two particular issues going on. One is the manganese applications, and the other is using aerification in two forms to alleviate compaction, one with a solid tine and one with a hollow tine, right? And then the manganese sulfate application. And when you look at what they recommend from your work, based on your work, these are some of the speculations. Now let's start with let me get to the picture. Here's the picture, right? So John, you want to take it from here and talk about this a little bit rather than me yakking?
Yeah. So the interesting thing, this was research that we had done, looking at compaction and different types of cultivation practices, both hollow tine and solid tine. And one thing that we saw, kind of going back there, in this study where we didn't compact the soil, we could not get the disease. So it just really reinforces how important compaction is. This disease is definitely dependent on compacted soils, reduced, again, war of attrition, the amount of roots. Compacted soils having less roots increases the likelihood or the severity of this disease. Okay, so these photos all show compacted plots, all right? But we have hollow and we have solid tine, okay? What we did see was that in some cases we had a little bit of an issue with the solid tines, okay? What we can see in this top three photographs at the top, right? This is a panel showing the additional factor that we were looking at, which was this manganese, okay? So when we look at the top three photographs, we can see that none of these plots have manganese. We see that the solid tine, which is in the middle, that's Frank circled there, has 6 clear patches of summer patch disease. All right. If we look at the hollow tine, we see there's no disease. Okay. If we look at the no cultivation, we can see faintly a little bit of disease in there. Okay. But what we're seeing here is that the solid tine actually increased the amount of summer patch. Okay. And this was a little bit surprising to me at first. I mean, obviously we see hollow tine reducing the disease as we would expect because we're relieving compaction. Solid tine actually increased it. And what we also did in this study is we measured compaction, okay? But we also used a penetrometer, okay? And so what we did is we actually excavated a soil plug 3 inches deep, which was the depth of our tines, okay? And we removed an intact core to a 3-inch depth, and then we put a penetrometer right on that spot. And we were able to see that we had developed a little bit of a hard pan from repeatedly solid tining to that same depth every year, okay?
In a native soil. In a native soil.
In a native soil, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so because we're, solid tining to that same level, we weren't removing that core, presumably we were creating a little compaction layer or pan layer right at that 3-inch depth.
All right, so listen, let's go back to, because you've explained the first 3 parts of this. The last part is the manganese, and I'm assuming it was manganese sulfate of some sort.
That's correct,
The question in the manual, and I'm wondering about it, have you done any more work to show you need these subsequent applications? Is there a level of manganese in the soil, John, that we need to have. Now, remind everybody why manganese in particular is important with these diseases, if you would.
So, I mean, manganese is, it's a nutrient required by the plant. At a basic level, it's utilized in the chlorophyll molecule, and it's important for photosynthesis and greening of the leaves. But in addition to that, it also has roles in plant defense. Manganese is one of the components that's involved in making phenolics, which are these compounds that plants will produce that can be toxic to fungi. And so when the fungus infects the plant, these phenolic compounds, these chemicals that the plant make, they get in there and they kind of degrade that mycelium as it's penetrating the plant. So chemically, manganese helps the plant form these chemical defenses, and it also helps the plant form lignin. Okay, this is a structural defense. Okay, so it makes those cell walls stronger and more resilient to infection by the pathogen as well. So manganese is involved in both physical and chemical defense.
And this is true for take-all as well on bent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So how much do we have to do? Do we have to apply it all the time?
Well, so the questions that you brought up with what is the rate, what is the interval? These are important questions that we are looking to address. I actually we've got funding from the Tri-State Research Foundation where we're looking at this in more depth about manganese availability and what is that critical amount of manganese to reduce the disease. Because
the old work that Bruce did years ago, back in the early 90s, also showed the value of ammoniacal nitrogen, ammonium sulfate, compared to calcium and potassium nitrate. Where does that fit into this? Do I need this? Is it the acidification as much as the manganese? Does the acidification potentially release the manganese?
Yes. So manganese is a nutrient that's pH dependent. Okay. So as the pH becomes lower, the amount of plant available manganese increases.
Okay.
Okay. And so what we see is, that's why we generally, there's a lot of reasons. We generally see less summer patch when our pHs are lower. Okay. 6.8 seems to be like kind of a cardinal value that a lot of us throw around, that if you're above 6.8, the likelihood of having, much more significant summer patch problems is greater, but, the severity of the disease will decrease at lower pHs. But so at those lower pHs, manganese is more plant available. And, that could be a factor in why, we see less of the disease at lower pHs.
Okay.
The ammonium sulfate reduces the pH right at the root zone, like right around the root. Okay, so it doesn't reduce this bulk soil pH very quickly, but it can have a dramatic effect on the pH right at the root, right where the pathogen is trying to infect the roots. And so that's presumably why we do see a significant impact of reducing summer patch severity with those applications of any ammonium-based fertilizer.
Okay, so from a cultural perspective, this is an area where nutrient management and pH adjustment, soil chemical properties can play a role in managing a disease, right? There's good, solid research in this area over a long period of time. And of course, alleviating compaction and maximizing your root mass and depth, of course, is going to be important. And then it's the what we always do, which are the early season drenches, John, that are done when to go back to this note here, right? This persistent temperature at a 2-inch depth that they've published on Summer Patch in the manual here. We're not there yet. Does this feel weird that we're not there yet? Would you have put it down already? If you put it down, is it gone? This is a very confusing time, I think, for this particular thing. That's why I wanted to have you on.
Yeah. No, I mean, every year is different. That's why we certainly, I always encourage people to actually measure their soil temperatures. To go by a calendar is really challenging with these types of applications. I mean, we're investing a lot in these applications. These are expensive applications, high rates, multiple applications.
Lots
You
of
gotta get that
water.
timing. Yeah, you
Lots
got
of
water
water.
them in. So, so it's really important to go that extra mile to measure those soil temperatures. And I'm not talking, I mean, Frank showed some great photos, some great graphics showing, regional soil temperatures based on the NUA site, and that's great. But you got to do that. You got to do that on your own site for yourself too.
That's right.
You gotta, where you have summer patch problems. It's a historical disease. It's going to show up in the same spots year after year. So you need to be getting a soil probe out there and measuring the temperature of those soils at a 2-inch depth. I suggest afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon is what I typically stick with. And you want to be consistent. I mean, you'll see a huge difference in that soil temperature at 2 inches if you're measuring in the morning versus the afternoon.
That's
okay.
Right. Yeah.
So,
it's responsive to air temperature,
yep.
right? It's
Yep.
responsive to air temperature. Okay. So, listen, there's a lot of things we can talk about regarding this. And of course, one of the things that we beat on is when I talk to Bruce about summer patch and why it fails sometimes, he says basically 2 things. Sometimes guys get lazy and don't put it on a high enough rate, right? You don't have it for a while. You think you could get by with a lower rate. And consistently, they don't put on enough water. That seems to me to be the story, right, John? Water, you got to be able to drench these things into where the roots are.
I mean, that's, to our best knowledge right now. I mean, that's what we would expect. I mean, this is a root pathogen. Fungicides do not move down in the plant. Okay, we want to protect those roots, and the only way we can protect those roots is by getting the fungicide to the root. And so, in maximizing our ability to do that, whether that's a combination of watering it in. I also think about uniformity of wetting profiles. Okay, using wetting agents and making you've seen the photos with the fingered water movement, right? Think about that's where your fungicide's going. Okay, and so if you don't get good uniform wetting profile down through the soil, then your fungicide's not going to uniformly treat your roots either. So I think you really want to be thinking about trying to maximize getting that fungicide to the roots, because it's challenging. All right, we use such high rates because a lot of these fungicides we use, they have an extremely high affinity for the organic matter in our soils. Okay, so a lot of the fungicide that we're putting there doesn't get to the root because it gets locked into the organic matter. So again, you want to try to create that. I like to think of, if you've got problems with it, maybe having a pre-treatment with a wetting agent before you apply the fungicide. You get a uniform wetting profile, and then having that material move down more uniformly, and maybe help improve the uptake.
And that is, that's a whole conversation, what you just went through on the way soils wet, how fungicides move. And I think to a certain extent, I've always described this application as a drench, so that guys, put on ridiculous amounts of water, because you're right. Once that fungicide gets there with the organic matter, it's going to bind. And it's going to make it more difficult to sort of do its thing on, get into the plant and provide the protection. What I think is fascinating and less talked about is this particular fact, John. I have to say, up until last week when I was thinking more about preparing for the conversation, I went through the guide, and what is this about where fungicides applied as curatives seem to be enhancing it or causing damage?
Fungicides apply, torque cause phytotoxins on bluegrass and several.
It says that when you spray Daconil and Chipco, you're getting more damage. I enhance symptom development. I had never seen that before.
I don't think they're talking about they're not talking about applying chlorothalonil or iprodione as curative applications for summer patch, because neither of those fungicides are really going to give you any control of summer patch. Okay?
Right. You're using these things for probably dollar spot or something else during this mid to late summer, right? So yes, it's not for summer patch, but when you use it, it seems to enhance summer patch.
Yeah, so this is information that's, Dr. Clark down at Rutgers has seen this in his field trials, where even like some of the premix fungicides that are available on the market, where it's a DMI by itself compared to a premix with DMI plus chlorothalonil, they're seeing more summer patch in those treatments that have the chlorothalonil in it. Not that it's increasing it compared to untreated or anything like that,
Right.
but they're not as effective when you put chlorothalonil or iprodione in. And the real reason for that is not, we can't say exactly at this point, but potentially what we're seeing is maybe this, there's all kinds of buzz about microbiome, phytobiome, and this kind of thing. Is it a situation where we maybe have some natural antagonism to the summer patch pathogen, and that the chlorothalonil or iprodione might be, suppressing those beneficial organisms and maybe potentially increasing the severity of the disease? We don't really know. I'm speculating.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. That's what we're doing here. Nobody's listening anyway, John. It's just us.
Oh,
right?
I think you and Carl.
Yeah, just me, you, and Carl. And I think, that's the kind of thing we need to get out there, because these are the things that still need to be studied. Now, let's listen. We're getting close to the witching hour, Carl, but I haven't talked about take all, John. And now that more guys are getting bent grass, certainly, you're not going to find bent grass like you're going to find POA or some things on heavy soils, unless they're fairways, of course. But again, bent grass, this is a primary problem, I would assume, of bent grass. The control that's recommended that I don't see for summer patch, and I wonder if it's just the nature of the way people have researched it, John. This is saying that actually for outbreaks in the spring, they want you to treat last fall. Is this a pretty standard recommendation for take all applications? And does that mean a spring application is really not worth it?
I mean, I would tend to agree with this. And the reason that the timings of these two different fungicide applications are different is because the activity, the growth of the pathogens are very much different. Take all Gummanomyces tends to be active and growing actively and infecting plants at cooler temperatures. Okay, it actually it shuts down during the warm summer months. Okay, but in the fall it reactivates. Okay, and so you can start to get those infections in the fall, which is why we suggest those fall applications. And the spring applications, you could almost think about that as, oh, well, what if I start my summer patch application in July? You're too late. So, I almost look at those fall applications as more critical than the spring applications if you have you have a persistent take all issue. Okay.
And the
Both
same
the
rules
fall and
apply,
the spring
right?
can be, I'm sorry?
The same rules apply, compacted soils, pH, manganese issues.
Yeah. And the manganese, I think the timing, corresponds with those fall and spring applications. You basically want to kind of make sure that material's out there when pathogens infecting and whatnot. Okay. But yeah, so yeah, a lot of the management recommendations are very similar across the board.
Okay. I didn't warn you, and we're coming to the 30 minutes, but Buckley's been listening to us yak the whole time. And so he's going to want to have something to say, Carl. I think he's asked something. And we got a question there?
Yeah, Rich has got a question. Do you feel that the solid tine increased disease due to raising bulk density at the solid tine? So I think you mentioned that a little bit, John, kind of that plow layer. I know we talk about that in ag. That's what you're attributing that to. Yeah.
I mean, and that's what the data supports. We actually did show, we documented an increase in the soil compaction, the pan layer right there at that 3-inch depth. That's why we talk about staggering that depth and, making sure you're kind of breaking that up and avoiding that.
I mean, it's really interesting because hollow tines, Marty Petrovic back in his graduate student days used a CAT scan device to measure the compaction around the tine. You can find the paper if you look it up. And he found even hollow tines. This was back in the day when Paul Ricci was just starting to study cultivation. I bear to say it, in the 70s. When they were just understanding that a plow layer could develop. I didn't know there was as significant a difference between the hollow tine compaction at the bottom and the solid tine, or that the hollow tine would go at different depths and not work the same, and maybe taking it out might make all the difference. I thought when you first started this work, there was something about injuring, that maybe the timing of the cultivation was an issue, but you saw it over multiple years, right?
We did see we did see some damage associated with timing. So we did see in some years where the hollow tining did increase the severity of summer patch a little bit.
Oh.
It didn't persist through the whole summer, but we did see that. But we did those aerifications quite late. Okay, I think in that year we didn't get around to aerifying those plots until like June. Okay, and so by June our soil temperatures are already pushing above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and so the likelihood of getting any root growth really, to kind of recover from that aggressive cultivation probably was quite low. And again, I related back to the attrition. We ended up with less root mass.
But it is good to know that aerification is a damaging and stressful thing, as much as we are in an industry that thinks it's a solution to every problem we have is put a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And I'm not always knocking it. It usually works, but I think the timing and when you do it is pretty tricky when we're trying to get as much rooting as we can. And on the heels of not being able to produce roots, it makes it worse. So Carl, questions?
Yeah, so I got a question on that kind of cultivation front. We talk about getting the summer patch drenches down to the roots, around 2-inch depth. And I kind of think, well, what if you just make holes at 2 inches? If you just tine to a 2-inch depth and then go with your drench over that. But we're also talking about this compaction issue. Has that been something they've studied, just making a hole to 2 inches and getting the fungicide down that way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know of any studies that have specifically looked at that, but I mean, to me, the logic is worth. It makes sense to me. Okay. I think if it seems to me that you would potentially get some, get those holes. You get the material moving down there. You might get a little bit of lateral spread. A little bit of downward spread. So I mean, if you can time it, if you can sync up those applications and everything like that, then I think it could be advantageous.
It's going to be tricky on soils. If you've got any clay in that soil and you do it when it's a little too wet, it's going to sheen the inside and seal the inside of that hole, and you're nowhere. You're just making little pools of the stuff. Now, eventually, maybe it seeps in, and so I've thought that the only way to really sort of improve this in some of these soils is with wetting agents. But the wetting agent work the guys are doing and what Kearns is doing in North Carolina, just published recently, I think he's doing that on sand. And they barely get the stuff to go down an inch in sand, John. We got USGA greens. They're putting on a quarter, half-inch of water. It's not going barely an inch. So I don't know where I'm going in a native soil with clay. And maybe I ought to think about cultural practices instead of drenching, that intermediate cut that I want to get rid of anyway.
Yep. Yeah. No, there's a lot. It's tricky. I mean, I'm glad Jim's doing that work because I think it's going to resolve a lot of questions that we have.
Well, it raises more, right, John? If really the best we're getting is an inch deep, we're not protecting any roots deeper than that. And if your image is any indication of how it can be, where it's a stark line between, man, it chopped all these and they're pretty good here. If it's a hard line like that, and that organism is plentiful in the soil, it seems to me that you need your soils and the chemical properties and maybe grass types. Do we have varieties that are different here, John? Are there varietal differences?
There's some varieties in Kentucky bluegrass that show some better, more resistant. I think Barvetta, Kentucky bluegrass tends to be a little bit more tolerant. I wouldn't say that any of them are. I'm sorry.
Not in POA. Not in POA.
No. Not annual bluegrass. No.
No. Okay, Carl. Questions?
Yeah, no questions. So I think we can wrap it at that. Right around half an hour. Really appreciate you coming on, John. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate that. Carl, survey.
Yeah, I'll throw this survey one more time in the chat box here.
And for those 5 of you that watched the video, fill out the survey.
Right. So, we've gotten a lot of responses so far, but I'll throw that again in there. And thanks for sticking with us. We'll see if we continue to do this, but
we'll see you next week for sure. We'll make a plan soon. John, best to Michelle and the kids. Take care.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
See ya.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.